it's Paige. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a good old-fashioned book recommendation video, I guess. And today, as you probably guessed from the title, I'm going to be talking about my favorite fantasy standalones. For this video, I am, I guess, going for an e-girl aesthetic. I don't know. I found this shirt at Hot Topic. It says Necromancer, and of course it has a cat who is a necromancer. And here we are. You know what? That's why I'm channeling this aesthetic today. All 7 of the books that I'm going to talk about today are obviously in the fantasy category, but I kind of varied them a little bit. So we have some YA fantasy in here, we have some adult fantasy, new adult fantasy, and we have different types of fantasy. So a little bit of like contemporary fantasy, a little bit of like retelling fantasy, and just like classic old high fantasy, or I don't know. I love fantasy standalones because I love fantasy, but sometimes like I'm not ready to commit to a super long series. So without further ado, let's start talking about these books. The first book I'd like to talk about was actually one of my absolute favorites of 2020. And it was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I would say this is a new adult fantasy with a little bit of historical fiction with tons of Mayan mythology inspiration. This is basically set in Mexico during the 1920s. This follows the protagonist Cassiopeia, who is living this sort of Cinderella life with her mother. Her dad is out of the picture, and she and her mother live with her grandfather, who treats them very, very poorly, until one day Cassiopeia finds this chest in her grandfather's room and accidentally unleashes the Mayan god of death. Being that she is the one who releases him, she must go on a quest with him to recover the parts of his body that were stolen or taken away by other gods. There's a great love story in here, not a spicy one really, but like really heartfelt and heartwarming, and the setting's really cool, the characters are fun. I just really enjoyed this, and I think it's a wonderful standalone. Like, she did such a wonderful job of condensing this really rich story into like 300 and something pages. It's crazy. I don't know how she did it. Sticking with these sort of like mythology retellings or inspired books, the next book I want to talk about is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I read this several years ago and was absolutely blown away by this book. I read this with the reading club at my college, and I feel like we were all just really taken aback by how rich and compelling the story and the characters were. This book made me cry. It made me heart-wrenchingly sad and happy and excited and on the edge of my seat. It was just beautiful. I should probably reread it soon, actually, because it's big on Book Talk now, and I feel like I could do with some refreshers. This is an adult fantasy, historical fiction, Greek mythology retelling of the tale of Achilles and Patroclus. It's from the perspective of Patroclus, but of course, as we know, the story is more so about like Achilles. Achilles is the son of a sea goddess and the king Peleus. So he has just tons of potential, and he is thought to be the best of all Greeks. So like he's growing up to be this sort of great warrior, great god, whereas Patroclus is like his companion and eventually his lover. It follows the two of them through their training, through their youth, eventually until they become mature and they end up in the siege of Troy. Within those like 300 and like, I don't know, 70 pages, you get to see basically their whole lives play out. It's such a beautiful story. I would highly recommend. And on this note, I will quickly throw in Circe by Madeline Miller, which is an awesome book I feel like to read after this book. It's a wonderful book in and of itself. It follows the goddess Circe, who sort of lives on this isolated island by herself, and we get to see her journey from being this like young, strange child of the god of the sun to being like fleshed out, fully in control of her own body, her own thoughts, and sort of coming into her own. And of course, just like with the Song of Achilles, there are characters from the Iliad and the Odyssey that show up in Circe. So like if you've read those, if you ever read those in high school or even after, like it's fun to see these characters in this new context or from these new perspectives of these different like side characters. It just gives it a whole new depth that's really fun. Okay, I'm gonna give you one more retelling, but definitely way different, not Greek mythology at all, or Mayan mythology. So again, very different, but this next recommendation is The Child Thief by Brom. I love how like square and like large his books are. Like, I just enjoy it. If you are not familiar with Brom, he is an incredible artist. So he illustrates and writes his own books. He also sells like prints and everything on his website if you end up wanting to buy something of his and hang it up. I think we would like to do that someday. This book is a retelling of Peter Pan. However, this is not young adult at all. It's pretty gory, which is standard, I feel like, for his books. He definitely specializes in dark retellings. I would say almost horror retellings. It takes a lot of inspiration from Arthurian legends. Kind of an interesting mix, but it works really well. So this actually follows the perspective of a boy named Nick who lives in contemporary New York City. He kind of lives in the slums of New York, and he ends up in a situation where he would have died if not for Peter Pan, or just Peter, who shows up and kind of saves Nick. Peter invites Nick to come back to this magical island where you never grow old and there's fairies and everything, and Nick agrees. And when they arrive in this weird and magical place, Nick is sort of inducted into this clan of boys and girls that make up like a warrior group called the Devils. Throughout the book, you sort of uncover layers and pieces of Peter's history and everything, and also like the history of this island and why it's the way it is. There's a surprising amount of world building in this, considering that it's a standalone. It's about 450 pages, but there's so much that is accomplished in those pages that it's just phenomenal. Like, I would highly recommend this to anyone who likes a little bit of horror, but also likes fantasy, also likes brotherhood, I guess you could say. If you're a little bit squeamish, I would be careful with this book. There are trigger warnings for this book. I would make sure that you are comfortable with those before you dive in. But if you are, then this is wonderful and really, really, really fun to get into. All right, 3 more left. This next one, again, is a super popular one, and I am not unique for recommending it, but I really loved it, so I am going to recommend that you read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I read this, I think, in 2017, so it has been quite a while. I just remember this book taking me on such a magical ride. I was just fully immersed. The setting was so beautiful. The writing was so beautiful. This is another sort of historical fiction, magical realism fantasy. It is historical fiction because it's set, I would say, late 1800s to early 1900s, I think. As you may have guessed from the title and from all of the people who have talked about this book over the years, it does follow a traveling circus, except this circus is a bit odd. This circus sort of appears out of nowhere. One day it's not there, the next day it is. And behind the scenes of this circus, this magical competition is taking place between these two magicians. They are battling, I guess, for sort of dominance or for victory. The girl is named Celia and the boy is named Marco. And there are definitely puppet masters in the wings trying to control these two magicians, trying to get them to do their will. But that gets a little bit complicated when the two of them start to fall in love. So this is a love story. I would definitely recommend this if you like atmospheric books, but I would not recommend this book if you're not into flowery writing, because it's not what I would call action-packed. You read it almost to kind of be put into this trance of atmosphere and mood. This is also one of the longer ones, so this is about 500 pages. All right, the last two I'm going to show you are both more contemporary fantasy. So let's start with The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. So this is an urban young adult fantasy. I might also say it's a little bit dystopian. I read this, I think, in 2019, and it was a very random decision on my part. This might have been before I had even read The Cruel Prince. I feel like this book is really underhyped and underrated. I feel like if you're really looking for urban fantasy but done differently, then this is a really, really cool book. So the protagonist of this book is a girl named Tana. At the point that she lives, the world has sort of been alerted to the existence of vampires, and there has sort of been like an outbreak of vampirism. So imagine like our world in Twilight, where like vampires are secret and there's all these laws and rules to maintain that secrecy, and then for some reason maybe the Volturi like stopped doing their job and like vampirism just went crazy. Like that's sort of the world that Tana lives in. The government did what they could to sort of contain that spread, and to do so they created these large cities called Coldtowns, and this is where all vampires or infected beings live. Tana is unfortunately witness to this massacre that takes place at a party she's at, where this vampire goes crazy and just eats a lot of people at the party. Somehow misses Tana, but ends up biting her ex-boyfriend, who she still has like feelings for, or she still cares about. And Tana, caring about this boy, ends up deciding to take him herself to a Coldtown. In this process, she also ends up with another companion who is this mysterious boy. The adventure is so much fun. Like, you get thrown into that action very early on in the book. You're with them on this journey to the Coldtown, and then, you know, obviously in the Coldtown what happens when they're let in, and it's so jam-packed for a book that's very small, I feel like, for a standalone. The story, the world, the situation is so fleshed out. You get a bit of romance in here. Obviously nothing like explicit or spicy because it's young adult, but it's satisfying, I feel like, and it really complements the plot. Alright, my next and final book recommendation is The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, this is another young adult contemporary fantasy, I would say, except the setting is fictional. So on this fictional island where our characters live, every December there are what are called the Scorpio Races. Horses kind of rise out of the sea. So they are like horses, they're not like seahorses. And on this island, riders and equestrians try to tame them so that they can race them. This is a very dangerous task because these horses can actually like eat you. Like, they're actually kind of like evil horses. I don't know. Our two protagonists, Sean and Puck, are kind of battling against each other to win this race for their own respective reasons and motivations. Very cool setting, very atmospheric. You get a little bit of a love story in this book too, and it complements the story very well. So much fun to get to know the characters and get to see them in this completely unique setting. During these Scorpio races, there's basically like a festival that takes place on this island, and you get to see like these traditions that Maggie Stiefvater's like come up with for the town. They're a little bit like creepy and a little bit like ritualistic, I would say. But you also get to see like these different types of like festival foods and like nice traditions, you know, for like kids and families. You know, she made a whole world. She made a whole island, a whole history and tradition for these characters and for these races that is just really fun to explore. Okay, so that was my final suggestion. I would like to do this again, but maybe with my favorite fantasy series. Like I said at the beginning, I really like fantasy standalones, so if you have suggestions for me, I would love to hear them. I may do another video also of like my favorite horror or thriller standalones, which is also another genre I love to read a lot. With that being said, that is the end of the video. If you did like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will see you back here again next week. Bye!